It was in the warm month of July, the air thick with the languor of a London summer. Fatford grinded twigs. When once again the call of duty carried me to Baker Street, that peculiar sanctuary of intellect and mystery, where my friend Sherlock Holmes resided. The morning sunlight slanted through the shutters, gilding the motes of tobacco smoke that always hovered in his study, mingling with the faint scent of chemicals, ink, and leather-bound volumes. To many it might seem an oppressive chamber. To me it was the very forge of reason and deduction, and each step upon that carpet felt like the crossing of a threshold into adventure. Holmes had written me a brief note the night before, and this kills summons Shroff and this killing Bashan, delivered by the familiar knock of a telegram boy, in which he declared, "Come at once, Watson. The matter presents curious features. A death at Aldershot. I promise your journey shall not be wasted." That was all, no further explanation. Such was his custom, to tantalize curiosity and sharpen the appetite for discovery. Need. When I arrived, I found Holmes seated in his armchair, his long, lean figure folded with feline grace, his eyes half closed as though in meditation. Yet the twitching of his fingers and the restless tapping of his long forefinger upon the armrest betrayed that his mind was already racing ahead. Here, the air was blue with smoke from his pipe, and before him lay an open map of Surrey, a half-written letter, and a magnifying glass whose polished rim caught the morning light. "Good morning, Holmes." Your note was so laconic that I scarcely knew whether to expect a murder, a theft, or a diplomatic scandal.
My dear Watson, brevity is the soul of clarity. The case in question concerns a most curious death, and the more curious circumstance that attends it. A Colonel James Barclay of the Royal Munsters has been found lifeless in his home near Aldershot.
Colonel Barclay, I know the name, a soldier of distinction, if I recall correctly. His campaigns in India were spoken of with admiration, and I believe he has the esteem of the regiment.
Quite so. A gallant record and a household built upon the respect he earned. Yet death has come to him most unexpectedly and under circumstances that to the local authorities are nothing short of bewildering. His widow, Mrs. Nancy Barclay, was found senseless near the body, and her statements, though fragmentary, cast a shadow of suspicion. The officers are uncertain whether to speak of accident, suicide, or something darker still.
And you, Holmes, which of these theories tempts your reason?
None, Watson, and therefore I must seek a new one. That is why I sent for you. We go to Aldershot together to examine the scene with our own eyes. Your medical judgment will be of value, and your company always steadies my own thoughts.
He rose, stretched his long limbs, and with characteristic swiftness had his hat upon his head and his walking stick in hand. I barely had time to collect my own things before we were rattling through the streets in a hansom cab toward the railway terminus. The clatter of hoofs and the cry of vendors faded as the smoke of the station enveloped us, and soon the whistle of the train announced our departure for Surrey. The journey to Aldershot was not a long one, yet it afforded me the opportunity to observe Holmes in one of those moods which alternated between silence and sudden bursts of explanation. He sat opposite me, his pipe clamped between his teeth, the smoke wreathing around his hawk-like features. At times his eyes would half close, as though he dozed. At others they gleamed with sudden intensity as he jotted some swift note in his pocketbook. "You puzzle me, Holmes. You speak of the colonel's death as though it were a matter already half solved, yet you have not even set foot upon the scene."
Observation, my dear fellow, precedes verification. The reports in the morning papers are sufficient to raise more questions than they answer. Consider a seasoned soldier, hale and vigorous, found dead in his own drawing-room. His wife, equally respected, lying senseless beside him. A servant summoned by cries enters to behold this tableau. No robbery, no weapon easily accounted for, and yet the door locked from the inside. What conclusion would you draw?
It bears the appearance of some sudden seizure, an apoplexy perhaps, while his wife, overcome, fainted at the sight.
You're reasonable, Watson, most reasonable. Yet consider further, there were reports of a quarrel, raised voices in that very room, moments before the death. Colonel and his lady had, it seems, exchanged bitter words.
That does indeed complicate matters. That does indeed complicate matters. Still, words between husband and wife are often sharp without leading to tragedy.
True, yet one cannot overlook the evidence of passion. Add to this the singular statement that when the body was found, the colonel's features bore an expression not of peace, but of horror. Yes, Watson, of horror, as though he had looked upon some dreadful sight in his last instant of life.
That is most strange. And you mean to say no cause for such a shock has been established?
Precisely, which is why we travel now. When facts appear inconsistent, it is not the facts, but our interpretation that fails. There is always a line of logic, however crooked it may at first appear, that binds cause to effect.
As he spoke, the rattle of the train wheels beneath us seemed to echo that phrase crooked line, crooked cause, crooked effect, and though I did not yet know it, the words were a shadowy prelude to the strange figure that would soon cross our path, the crooked man himself. The fields of Surrey stretched out before us as we descended from the train at Aldershot. Soldiers in red tunics could be glimpsed upon the parade ground, their movements sharp and ordered beneath the summer sun. The town bore the martial air of discipline, yet beneath it ran a current of unease, for the news of Colonel Barclay's death had spread rapidly, and whispers filled the air like leaves rustling in a sudden wind. The Durham. We made our way by cab to the residence of the late Colonel Cohen, a solid brick house standing within a quiet lane shaded by elms. A police constable awaited us at the door, and after a few words of explanation, Holmes having already communicated with the local authorities, we were admitted to the somber chamber where the tragedy had occurred. The room bore the aspect of an ordinary drawing room of an officer's family, yet my medical eye at once detected the unnatural stillness that lingers where death has so recently been. The furniture was somewhat disarranged, as though a struggle had taken place. Upon the hearthrug, near an overturned chair, lay the faint impression of where the body had fallen. Holmes moved swiftly about, pausing here, kneeling there, his magnifying glass flashing as he scrutinized the carpet, the mantel, and the heavy curtains.
Observe, Watson, the chair overturned, but not shattered. A sudden push rather than a desperate grapple. And here, look closely, scratches upon the surface of the table as though a cane or stick had struck it in haste.
Yes, I see them. But what of the colonel himself? Was there evidence of violence upon the body? Consulted the police notes, for the remains had already been removed. No wounds are recorded. Like you, Jure, death was sudden, but no mark was found upon him save a slight bruise upon the temple, insufficient in itself to account for mortality. His face, they say, was distorted, the muscles contracted as though by a convulsion.
A convulsion or a fright. There is a distinction, and therein may lie our key.
At that moment, a soft step behind us announced the entrance of Major Murphy, fellow officer of the regiment, who had been among the first to arrive upon the scene. His countenance was grave, and his manner bore that mixture of military precision and suppressed agitation, which speaks of long habit under discipline.
Gentlemen, I am glad Scotland Yard has taken an interest. Colonel Barclay was my comrade and friend. The regiment is shaken to its core. We cannot believe his end could have been natural, nor can we believe any ill of his lady, who is held in equal esteem.
Major, your testimony will be invaluable. Did you hear aught yourself of the quarrel said to have taken place?
I did not, but the servants speak of raised voices. Heirs! It was a rare thing, for the colonel and his wife were considered most devoted. Indeed, their marriage was an example to many.
Then the contradiction is even sharper. A happy household torn by sudden discord. It demands explanation.
And explanation we shall have, Watson. Step by step, even the most crooked of lines may be traced.
With that, he resumed his silent investigation, while I, standing by the window that overlooked the quiet garden, could not help but feel that the walls of that chamber held some secret yet untold, a secret that had bent two lives into sudden tragedy, and that would soon draw us into a tale more twisted than any I had yet encountered in the company of Sherlock Holmes. The chamber in which Colonel Barclay had met his untimely fate lay heavy with silence. The subdued light filtering through the lace curtains seemed to cling to every surface, as though reluctant to brighten so sombre a scene. My companion, Sherlock Holmes, moved with deliberate care, pausing often to kneel and inspect some seemingly trivial detail invisible to ordinary perception. To Holmes, however, every displaced object, every faint scuff upon the carpet was a potential chapter in a tale written in silence. He studied the hearthrug with such intensity that I feared to break his concentration. Major Murphy, who had joined us, stood stiffly at the door, his soldier's posture betraying his unease. Holmes, I ventured at last, you observe something of note?
Of many notes, Watson, each small in itself, but when combined they form a melody not yet fully heard. Here, for instance, upon the sill of the open window, what do you see?
Cayuse, merely a smudge of dust, possibly the mark of a shoe.
Ah, not a shoe, Watson. Look closer. The impression is elongated, narrow, as if made by some object curved yet firm. And there, upon the garden path, a faint line pressed into the gravel, irregular and halting, as though some creature had passed, dragging itself with effort.
You mean to suggest an intruder?
Or a visitor, which in such cases may amount to the same thing. The point is that the colonel was not alone with his wife at the moment of crisis. Another presence intruded upon their domestic peace.
That is news indeed, Mr. Holmes. The constabulary spoke of no intruder. The door to the garden was closed when we entered.
Closed, yes, but closed after the fact. There is a world of difference, Major, between what is locked to exclude and what is closed to conceal.
Holmes rose and stepped briskly to the mantel, upon which stood several small ornaments and a framed miniature of the colonel in his younger days, resplendent in his uniform. He studied it with narrowed eyes, then turned sharply to us.
You say, Major, that Colonel and Mrs. Barclay were considered most devoted?
Indeed, their marriage was universally admired. I cannot recall a single public quarrel, nor a moment when affection seemed lacking.
Then what cause could drive such sudden discord that neighbors overheard their raised voices? We must search the past for the seed of present calamity. And where, Major, did Colonel Barclay first make his name?
In India, during the mutiny, he was but a young officer then, yet he distinguished himself greatly in those campaigns.
Precisely. The shadows of India stretch long, Watson, and oftentimes the deeds of youth return when least expected.
Holmes fell silent again, his gaze drifting to the carpet where a faint, irregular scratch caught his attention. He stooped, produced a magnifying glass, and studied it minutely.
Watson, note this mark. A sharp point dragged across the fibers, not once but several times. And here again, parallel to the first. Tell me, what common implement might leave such traces?
A cane, perhaps, the ferrule of a walking stick.
Just so, yet not wielded in the ordinary way. Observe the irregular intervals, the hesitations. This was no brisk stride, but a halting advance, as though the owner leaned heavily upon it. Yes, Watson, the unseen visitor was lame or crooked. Ria!
The word seemed to linger in the air like an echo. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the July day. A lame intruder? But who could he be, and what business had he in Colonel Barclay's drawing room?
That is precisely what we must uncover. Yet already the crooked line begins to straighten. Tell me, Major, did Colonel Barclay ever speak of enemies, either from his campaigns abroad or closer to home?
Not that I recall. He was respected by all ranks, yet
Yes, pray continue.
there was, years ago, some talk of an unfortunate comrade, a sergeant who was lost under strange circumstances during the mutiny. The colonel seldom spoke of it, and when he did, it was with such brevity that I cannot supply the details. Perhaps some in the regiment may know more.
Excellent, Major. You have supplied a thread, however slight, and threads may yet weave a pattern. I shall wish to speak with Mrs. Barclay as soon as her health permits. For now, we must examine every corner of this room.
Holmes continued his scrutiny with relentless energy, while I conversed quietly with Major Murphy. Major Murphy! Oh! The soldier's grief for his comrade was genuine, and yet beneath it, I thought I detected a faint unease, as though he too sensed that the colonel's past had not entirely been laid to rest. At length, Holmes declared himself satisfied, and we withdrew into the garden. The July sun fell warmly upon the flower beds, and the air was heavy with the scent of roses. Yet even here the shadow of tragedy lingered, for upon the gravel walk Holmes pointed out the irregular trail he had observed from the window. His he had observed from the window.
There is no mistaking it now, Watson. See how the line veers and halts, like the trace of a cripple's staff. And there at the far end, do you perceive that impression in the soil?
A footprint, though oddly distorted.
Exactly. The left foot twisted inward, the toes turned at an unnatural angle. Whoever walked here bore some deformity. And mark this, by the gate a faint smear of clay, as though a dragging motion had rubbed against the wood. The visitor departed this way.
Holmes, your eye misses nothing. But what manner of man is this crooked visitor, and how came he to enter the colonel's private chamber?
Aha, that, Watson, is the heart of the mystery. But be assured, the crooked man and the dead colonel are bound together by threads which stretch far into the past.
We left the grounds with heavy thoughts, and Holmes suggested that we take lodgings in town until Mrs. Barclay might be fit to see us. The afternoon waned, and we passed some hours at the local inn, Holmes pacing restlessly while I endeavored to occupy myself with the medical journals I had brought. Yet it was clear that his mind was far afield, ranging over distant battlefields and long-forgotten encounters.
Watson, the military is a world unto itself. The friendships and enmities formed upon campaign are of an intensity unknown elsewhere. A life may be saved by a comrade one day, and the obligation is eternal. Likewise, a betrayal, real or imagined, may smoulder for decades until opportunity rekindles it.
You believe then that the colonel's death is the result of some enmity born in India?
It is the working hypothesis, yes. The presence of the crooked intruder, his lame tread, his deformed foot, all suggest a man who has suffered. And suffering, Watson, is a forge in which bitterness is often tempered.
That night, as the town of Aldershot lay hushed, save for the distant calls of sentries, I lay awake pondering my friend's words. Words! The image of the crooked footprint haunted me, and I wondered what terrible history lay behind its distorted shape. The following morning brought fresh developments. A note arrived from the local authorities stating that Mrs. Barclay had recovered sufficiently to receive visitors. Without delay, Holmes and I made our way once more to the colonel's residence, where we were shown into a modest sitting room. There we found Mrs. Utley, pale and worn from her ordeal, yet possessing still the grace and dignity that had won her the affection of the regiment. She greeted us faintly, her eyes betraying both grief and apprehension.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I am told you come not to accuse, but to seek truth. I pray you believe me when I say I loved my husband despite the cruel words that passed between us on that last evening.
Madam, we come only to discover what truly befell. You alone may hold the key, if you can bear to speak.
It is hard, so hard. James and I were indeed devoted. Yet on that evening, as we sat together, a name was spoken which struck me like a thunderbolt from the past. I confronted him. Oh, forgive me. My words were sharp, for the memory is one of deep sorrow to me. We quarreled. Then,
Yes, madam. What then?
before I could finish, the door from the garden opened, and there stood. Oh, oh, it's Amibar I could finish, the door from the garden opened. On the Boshar lay Oldoy. Heaven help me! A figure so altered by suffering that I scarce knew him. Bent, twisted, with a face limed by pain. A crooked man.
Her voice broke, and she pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze keen and compassionate.
And you recognized him.
I did. Long ago, before ever I was married, I knew him as Henry Wood, a sergeant in the regiment. We had been friends, but during the mutiny he disappeared. I believed him dead. to see him thus after so many years. It was as if a ghost had stepped through the garden gate.
At these words, Holmes cast me a quick glance, and I saw that the crooked lines of the mystery were at last beginning to form a discernible shape. Mrs. Barclay's revelation cast a deep hush upon the room. Her delicate hands trembled as she pressed the handkerchief to her lips, her eyes downcast as though unable to bear the weight of her own words. Holmes, ever attuned to the tremors of the human heart, waited in silence, allowing her time to compose herself. The ticking of the mantel clock filled the interval with a solemn cadence.
You speak of Henry Wood, madam, a name that has survived in whispers among your husband's comrades. Tell us all that you know of him.
It is a tale I have long sought to forget. Years ago, before James Barclay and I were wed, Henry Wood was my friend. He was a sergeant, brave and loyal, with a spirit of kindness that endeared him to many. I believed him to be of noble character. But during the mutiny, those terrible days of blood and fire, he vanished. I was told he had perished in an ambush. Beach of Wingabiz. I wept for him, prayed for his soul, and in time I accepted James's offer of marriage. He was kind, steadfast, and bore a gallantry that seemed to shine brightest in those dark times. Never did I dream that Henry yet lived, but
Her voice quavered as she spoke, and she clasped her hands tightly as though to summon courage. Holmes inclined his head gently, but his eyes shone with that sharp gleam which betrayed the spark of deduction burning within. Madam, when this Henry Wood entered your garden, how did your husband respond?
with fury, such fury as I had never seen in him. His face grew dark, his eyes wild. He accused me of deceit, of treachery, as though the mere presence of Henry Wood were proof of some dishonor. I tried to explain, but the words fell to shouting. Then it happened.
What, madam?
The colonel clutched his head, his face contorted in horror, and he fell to the floor. At the same instant, I myself swooned. When I regained sense, Henry Wood was gone, and my beloved husband lay lifeless at my side.
She covered her face, and a silence followed, broken only by the rustle of the curtains in the summer breeze. No, we can chiricat.
Mrs. Barclay, I thank you for your candor. You have spoken bravely of matters painful to recall. Rest assured that the truth, however crooked, will emerge into the light. For now, be at peace.
He rose and with a respectful bow withdrew, motioning for me to follow. Once outside, Holmes strode quickly down the garden path, his long legs carrying him with restless energy. Holmes, her words confirm your suspicions. Henry Wood lives, and it is he who was the crooked visitor.
Indeed, Watson, the twisted footprints, the marks of a stick, all correspond to the figure she described. Yet there remains a question of motive. Did Henry Wood intend harm, or was his presence that of a spectre from the past, whose mere appearance proved fatal to the colonel?
You think Barclay died of fright alone?
Fright or shock, perhaps mingled with remorse. A man's conscience may slumber for years, yet one sudden jolt may rouse it to deadly effect. Still, conjecture is not proof. How? We must find Henry Wood himself, hear his own account, and judge where the truth lies.
With this resolve, Holmes sought out the local authorities, and within the hour we were furnished with intelligence. Several townsfolk, it seemed, had caught glimpses of a bent, twisted figure limping through the outskirts of Aldershot in the twilight hours. The description matched Mrs. Barclay's to the letter. Holmes seized upon these reports with eagerness, and we set forth to trace the crooked man's steps. The trail led us through winding lanes and humble cottages, until at last we came to a dilapidated row of dwellings at the edge of the town. There, in the meanest of them, a neighbor declared the man we sought resided, living alone, save for a strange companion, an animal of curious aspect. An animal?
Cheaper. Aye, sir, some beast he brought from abroad. Small, dark, and devilish in its looks, though it seems tame enough. Folks avoid the place, for the creature peers from the window as though it understands more than it ought.
At this description, Holmes's eyes gleamed, and he exchanged a quick glance with me. Without further delay, we approached the dwelling, its timbers warped and roof sagging with age. Holmes rapped sharply at the door. For a moment, there was silence. Silence. Then came a shuffling sound, slow and uneven, and the door creaked open. Before us stood a figure whose appearance might well have startled even the stoutest heart. He was bent nearly double, his shoulders hunched, his limbs twisted by some cruel affliction. His face, lined and seamed, bore the marks of long suffering, yet in his eyes there flickered a spark of intelligence, wary yet defiant. Beside him, crouched upon a stool, was the strangest creature I had ever beheld. A small Indian mongoose, sleek and sharp-eyed, its tail twitching restlessly.
So, you found me at last. Well then, come in if you must. You want the truth of it, don't you? I'll give it to you. Sit you down. Poor.
The crooked man motioned us within, and we entered a bare room furnished with little save a wooden chair and a rough pallet. The mongoose fixed its eyes upon us, unblinking, as though it understood the gravity of the moment. Holmes inclined his head politely and seated himself with composure.
Mr. Wood, we come not as accusers but as seekers of fact. Colonel Barclay is dead. His widow has named you as present at the time. If you value truth and your own peace, you will tell us all.
Dead is he? Well. I thought as much when I saw him fall, though I never laid a hand upon him. His own black heart did the work. But you shall have the tale, for it has weighed on me too long. Listen, and you judge if Henry would be villain or victim.
Shifted painfully in his seat, his twisted limbs trembling with the effort, and began his story.
It was in India, during the mutiny. I was then a sergeant, proud to serve, proud to be near Nancy, for we were as good as betrothed, though no vows had been spoken. She trusted me, and I loved her with all the strength of my heart. Then came James Barty, young, ambitious, with a smooth tongue and bold manner. He coveted Nancy, and he saw in me a rival. Still, we served together, and I never dreamed he would stoop to treachery.
One night, in the midst of those terrible days, he sent me with a message, false. As I later learned, he sent reinforcements awaited at a certain house beyond the town, and that I must go at once. I went, believing his word, but no friends awaited me there, only enemies. The rebels seized me, dragged me off, and for years I suffered in captivity. Torture, starvation, disease, these twisted limbs are their legacy. They broke my body, but they did not break my spirit. When at last I escaped, I was a wreck of a man, bent, crippled, and forgotten.
His voice trembled with suppressed passion, and his eyes burned as he spoke. The mongoose chattered as though echoing his indignation.
And what did I find on my return? That Nancy, believing me dead, had wed James Barclay. My enemy had stolen both my freedom and my happiness. I kept away, for what could a crooked wreck like me offer her? But the bitterness ate at me year after year, until at last I could bear it no longer. I came to Aldershot to confront him, to see if his conscience would answer for the wrong he had done me.
And when you confronted him,
He raged like a madman, accused Nancy of betrayal, as though she had known of his villainy. She tried to speak, poor soul, but he shouted her down. Then, all at once, he turned pale, clutched at his chest, and fell dead before us. I swear to you, by all that is holy, I never struck him. His own guilt killed him as surely as any blade.
He sank back, exhausted, his chest heaving. Holmes regarded him steadily, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin.
your tale has the ring of truth, Mr. Wood. The twisted trail in the garden, the marks of your stick upon the carpet, all attest to your presence, but not to violence. Tell me, this creature of yours, how came you by it?
Ah, this little fellow? He was my companion in captivity. The natives call him a mongoose. He saved me from serpents more than once, faithful he is, and I could not leave him. We are both outcasts, he and I.
Holmes nodded, his expression softened by a rare touch of sympathy. He, too, felt a pang of compassion for this poor, broken man whose body bore the scars of betrayal and torment, yet whose spirit still burned with dignity. How sobered!
Watson, you see how the crooked line has led us to its source. The Colonel's death was not murder, but the collapse of a guilty heart when faced with the ghost of its past. The law will not trouble you, Mr. Wood, though your presence must be made known to clear Mrs. Barclay of suspicion. Rest assured, the truth shall be told with fairness.
Then may heaven bless you, sir. I seek no vengeance now. Let her be spared the pain of shame. As for me, I shall return to my obscurity with only my mongoose for company.
And so the crooked man's tale was laid bare, a tale of love betrayed, of suffering endured, and of conscience striking down where human hand had not. Holmes and I left the humble dwelling in silence, the evening sun casting long crooked shadows across the road, as though the very earth remembered the twisted path of Henry Wood. The air outside Henry Wood's humble dwelling felt strangely lighter, though the tale we had just heard was heavy with tragedy. The crooked man's words rang in my ears, and I confess my heart ached with compassion for one so cruelly treated by fate. Beside me, Holmes walked in silence, his long stride measured, his face set in an expression of grave reflection. Holmes, I said at length, his story is most affecting. The poor fellow has endured more than any man should be asked to bear. I cannot but believe him.
Nor do I doubt him, Watson. The physical evidence fits his account with remarkable precision. The twisted footprints in the gravel, the cane marks on the carpet, the distorted shoe impression, all testify to his presence. Yet none speak of violence. The colonel's own collapse was brought on by the sudden revelation of his villainy, not by Henry Wood's hand.
Then Mrs. Barclay is innocent, as you believed from the outset.
Entirely so. Yet appearances conspired against her. A locked room, a quarrel overheard, a husband lying dead, and a wife insensible at his side. Such are the circumstances from which juries weave ropes of suspicion. Were it not for the crooked line traced across the garden path, the truth might have remained forever obscured.
We returned to our lodgings, where Holmes seated himself by the window, pipe in hand, and gazed out upon the parade ground where soldiers drilled in neat formation. Contrast between their straight, disciplined lines and the halting tread of the crooked man was not lost upon me. Holmes, I said after a time, may I ask, at what point did you first suspect the existence of an intruder?
Wah, Watson, your question strikes at the heart of deduction. The reports spoke of raised voices, of a quarrel between husband and wife. Yet, when the body was examined, no marks of violence were found. How then could discord alone result in death? There must have been some additional element, some factor unaccounted for. The key was the locked room. If no one entered or left by the door, then the garden must have offered passage. And once my eye fell upon the faint marks upon the sill, the rest followed inevitably.
You reasoned backward from the impossibility.
Precisely. Always, Watson, when the ordinary explanation fails, we must seek the extraordinary. That is the essence of our science. The crooked trail in the gravel, the twisted impression of a foot, all spoke of a visitor whose body bore the mark of suffering. Only then did Mrs. Barclay's faint words of recognition find their confirmation.
Holmes smoked in silence for a few moments, then continued in a lower tone, his eyes thoughtful.
Yet deduction alone is but half the task. To know the truth of human hearts, that is the greater challenge. We may trace footsteps in gravel, but can we trace remorse in the soul? Colonel Barclay's conscience proved the deadliest of weapons. It struck him down in an instant, more swiftly than any bullet.
A just punishment, perhaps. Perhaps.
Perhaps. Yet justice meted out by circumstance is seldom merciful. Think of Henry Wood, bent and broken, bearing the scars of another man's treachery. Think of Nancy Barclay, her memories poisoned by the knowledge that the husband she revered had once betrayed her first love. In such tragedies, Watson, no one escapes unscathed.
The following day, Holmes arranged for a formal interview with the local magistrate. There he recounted the crooked man's tale with scrupulous care, presenting the evidence in its true light. The magistrate, a grave and conscientious gentleman, listened attentively, and when Holmes had concluded, he nodded with solemn approval.
Mr. Holmes, your reasoning is most persuasive. It is clear that no crime of murder had been committed. Colonel Barclay's death was the consequence of his own agitation. As for Henry Wood, though his tale arouses pity, he has broken no law in returning to confront the man who wronged him. Mrs. Barclay may be entirely exonerated.
Relief flooded me at these words, and I saw Mrs. Barclay herself, who had been summoned to hear the judgment, sink back in her chair with tears of gratitude. Holmes inclined his head slightly, as though such outcomes were merely the natural fruit of logic.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, how shall I thank you? You have lifted a great weight from my heart, though it rests still heavy with grief that my husband deceived me so cruelly in years long past. I can scarce reconcile it with the man I knew. Yet truth is better than shadows. On the right, I pray Henry Wood may find some peace in the knowledge that I never ceased to esteem his memory, though fate divided us.
Madam, peace is seldom granted by others. It must be found within. Yet I believe Mr. Wood, though crooked of body, remains straight of spirit. Time may heal what torment has left behind.
We departed from the magistrate's office, and Holmes, with his customary briskness, turned his steps toward the barracks. I inquired of him the reason. Holmes, the case seems resolved. Why do you seek the barracks?
Because, Watson, and tenth, there remains one duty, to confirm through the Colonel's own comrades the events of India. Corroboration is the steel that hardens the blade of truth. A detective must never be content with half proof.
Awesome, man. At the barracks, we were received by several officers, men of stern bearing, yet deeply shaken by the loss of their comrade. Among them was Major Murphy, who had first spoken to us.
Mr. Holmes, the regiment owes you gratitude. The cloud of suspicion upon our colonel's widow was most grievous to us. Tell me, have you indeed traced the truth?
I believe so, Major. I cheerago. By door. Yet I ask you, do you recall aught of a certain Sergeant Henry Wood during the mutiny?
Indeed I do. A brave fellow, much respected. His disappearance was long a matter of sorrow. We were told he had perished, captured by the enemy. None other. There were whispers only, that he had been betrayed, but nothing was ever proved.
And what did you think of Colonel Barclay in those days?
He was bold, resourceful, ambitious. He rose swiftly, as you know. But, if I speak plainly, I cannot say he was loved by all. His manner was sometimes imperious. Still, none could deny his courage.
Thank you, Major. Your candor assists us. The whispers you mention were not unfounded. Henry Wood himself has returned and laid bare the truth. The Colonel's advancement came at the price of another's ruin.
Good God, then the Colonel.
Is beyond the judgment of men. We can only record the truth and let history weigh his deeds. For now, let the regiment honor his service, while time and providence deal with the darker matters of his past.
The officers murmured among themselves, their faces grave. Holmes and I withdrew, leading them to reconcile the colonel they had known with the revelations of treachery. That evening, as we dined at our inn, Holmes was uncommonly reflective. He toyed with his food absent-mindedly, and more than once I saw his gaze drift to the lamplight as though tracing unseen patterns in the smoke. You are unusually pensive, Holmes. Does the case still trouble you?
It does, Watson, not for lack of clarity, for the facts are plain, but because it reveals the crookedness of fate itself. Consider, a man's youthful treachery, hidden for decades, returns at last in the shape of a broken figure, a living accusation. No court could punish Barclay as nature did. His own conscience proved the executioner. Yet what of those around him? Nancy, who suffers disillusionment. Wood, who suffers exile of body and spirit. Even the regiment, stained by the betrayal of one of its own. It is a lesson, Watson, a reminder that the ripples of past deeds widen far beyond the moment of their making.
You speak almost as a moralist, Holmes.
Perhaps deduction is but another form of morality, Watson. To perceive cause and consequence clearly is to see the justice or injustice of men's actions. The crooked line of this affair shows how a single lie may twist the lives of many.
I pondered his words long after we retired. Outside, the bugle sounded across the parade ground, summoning soldiers to their duties. Yet for me, the call was not of war but of reflection, for I had glimpsed through Holmes's eyes the strange arithmetic of fate in which debts unpaid returned with compound interest after many years. On the following morning, we made arrangements to return to London. Queer. Before departing, however, Holmes insisted upon one final act to visit Henry Wood once more. We found the crooked man seated by his hearth, the faithful mongoose curled at his feet. He looked up with weary eyes as we entered.
Back again, are you? Has the law decided I'm to be dragged away after all?
On the contrary, Mr. Wood, the magistrate has accepted the truth of your story. You are free from any charge.
Free. Through.
Yes, sir. Mrs. Barclay herself has spoken in your defense, and all suspicion is lifted.
Then I thank you. Though truth be told, what freedom have I left? These twisted bonds are my prison. Still, I can breathe easier knowing Nancy is spared.
That, sir, is the best outcome we may hope for. I advise you now to seek such peace as you can. The past cannot be undone, but it need not dictate the future.
Aye, perhaps. At least I've spoken my truth. That's more than I thought I'd live to do.
Gee, we took our leave, and as we walked away, I glanced back. The crooked man sat motionless in his doorway, the mongoose perched alertly beside him, both figures silhouetted against the fading light. It was an image I knew would remain with me always, a broken body, a faithful companion, and the long shadow of a crooked past. Our journey back to London was undertaken in thoughtful silence. The countryside rolled past in waves of green, yet my mind remained upon the faces we had left behind, the grief-stricken widow, the bent and broken figure of Henry Wood, and the stern countenances of soldiers grappling with the shadows of their colonel's past. Beside me, Holmes reclined in the corner of the carriage, eyes half closed, fingers steepled, lost in a reverie, from which even the jolt of the wheels seemed unable to rouse him. Holmes, I ventured after some miles, this case has touched you more deeply than most. Am I wrong?
No, Watson, you are seldom wrong when you speak of human sentiment. This affair, though lacking the glitter of jewels or the intrigue of elaborate crime, holds within it a lesson of greater weight. It is a crooked story in which truth and falsehood wound their way across decades, leaving lives bent and broken in their wake.
You speak of Henry Wood.
Of Wood, yes, and of Barclay, and of Nancy, and of every soul entangled in the skein. Consider, Watson, a single act of treachery, performed in youth and ambition, festers unseen for 30 years, only to resurface with fatal consequence. One might call it fate. I prefer to call it the inexorable law of cause and effect. The crooked line, however long, returns at last to its origin.
I could not deny the justice of his words. My medical training had taught me to trace symptoms back to their causes, yet in Holmes's hands the same principle extended to the affairs of men, where conscience and memory could prove as deadly as any disease. And what of Mrs. Barclay? Will she not suffer unduly, knowing her husband's honor was stained?
She will suffer, yes, but better the bitter draught of truth than the slow poison of suspicion. Had we not intervened, she might have borne the ignominy of false accusation. Now, at least her name is cleared, though her heart be wounded. Time, the great physician, may do what we cannot.
The train rattled onward, and soon the familiar skyline of London rose before us, its chimneys belching smoke, its streets alive with the ceaseless hum of the metropolis. By evening, we were once more at Baker Street, seated by the hearth where so many strange tales had begun and ended. Mrs. Hum. Hudson brought in our supper, and after she withdrew, Holmes poured himself a measure of brandy, a rare indulgence on his part. He settled into his chair, pipe in hand, and regarded me with that half-smile which suggested both amusement and instruction.
Come, Watson, you have observed much of this case. Let me hear your own reconstruction. How would you present the affair were you to set pen to paper?
Well then, I said, warming to the task, I should begin with the scene of the quarrel. A locked room, the colonel dead, his wife insensible, suspicion falling naturally upon her. Then I should recount your examination of the footprints, the twisted impressions that bespoke a visitor afflicted by deformity. From there, the revelation of Henry Wood, his tale of betrayal in India, and the colonel's collapse from sheer shock. Huzzah! Finally, I should close with the exoneration of Mrs. Barclay and the melancholy figure of the crooked man living in obscurity with his mongoose.
An admirable summary, Watson, concise, accurate, and not without a touch of sentiment. Yet permit me to sharpen one or two points. The key to the entire case lay not in the locked room, but in the garden paths. Had I not observed the peculiarity of those tracks, we should never have known that a third person was present. Always, my dear fellow, the smallest details are the hinges upon which great doors swing.
I shall remember that. Yet I cannot help but think the human element most striking. The science of deduction may unravel the mechanics, but it is the beating of the human heart that gives the story its life.
And there you show your own strength, Watson. Where I excel in logic, you excel in sympathy. Between us, perhaps, we form a complete whole. I am Buth. The public, when it reads your accounts, cares less for the dust upon a footprint than for the soul of the man who left it. That is your contribution, and it is not a negligible one.
I confess I was warmed by his words. Rare praise from one who dealt in facts rather than compliments. Goldbrums, perceiving perhaps that I was moved, diverted the conversation with a brisk tapping of his pipe.
Now, let us consider the broader lesson. In this affair, we see the crooked consequences of dishonor. Barclay's treachery, though hidden, shaped the destinies of 3 lives. Wood, once a strong and gallant soldier, returned a wreck. Nancy, innocent of all, found her marriage built upon a falsehood. And Barclay himself, outwardly honored, inwardly guilty, died at the sudden sight of the man he had wronged. If ever there were a demonstration that the universe holds men accountable, this is it.
It is indeed. And yet, do you not pity the colonel, even in his guilt, to die so suddenly, undone by the spectre of his own past?
Pity, Watson, is not incompatible with judgment. I do not exult in his downfall. I merely observe that justice was served, not by human hand, but by the natural workings of conscience. He deceived, and the deception recoiled upon him. It is elementary.
Okay, a silence followed, filled only by the crackle of the fire. I thought of Henry Wood, his bent figure hunched in the doorway of his shabby dwelling, the faithful mongoose at his side. Do you think we shall see him again?
Unlikely. Such men fade into the margins of society, seldom to emerge. Yet his story will remain, if you choose to record it, as a reminder that crooked paths may yet lead us to the truth.
And so I resolved that I would indeed set down the tale, not merely for the record of Holmes's brilliance, Pidians, but for the lesson it imparted, that betrayal breeds tragedy, that conscience is the sternest of judges, and that even the most crooked of men may walk with dignity if their spirit remains unbroken. Thus ends the account of The Adventure of the Crooked Man, one of the strangest and most affecting of the many cases in which I had the privilege to accompany Sherlock Holmes.